Yep. So all of those fluids can transmit an STI. So blood can transmit an STI, so can semen, vaginal fluids, and breast milk. All four of those things are fluids that allow an STI to transmit. So anytime a person is coming in contact with any of those fluids, there's a little bit of a risk. The one bonus answer that we have to this is skin-to-skin contact. So if a person with infected genitals touches another person's genitals, it's possible for an STI to transmit in that way as well. So the ways that an STI could transmit are those four fluids: the blood, semen, vaginal fluids, and breast milk, and then skin-to-skin contact. And skin-to-skin contact is your bonus answer if you're working on the worksheet. All right, so if you put these in order correctly, in order from lowest risk to highest risk of transmitting an STI, on this end, the low risk end, we would have waving at someone from 6 feet away. We all probably are pretty familiar with this now, right? It's social distancing. So if someone waves at someone from 6 feet away, they're obviously not going to get an STI, right? Next in, we have masturbation. So if a person is stimulating their own genitals, they're not going to give themselves an STI, right? Now, that is if someone is by themselves and provided that they haven't used that hand to touch someone else's genitals right beforehand, right? But again, very like no to low risk there, okay? The next up, we have kissing someone with a cold sore. So cold sores are another name for oral herpes. If a person has oral herpes, they can transmit it to someone else if they have an open sore or if they've recently had an open sore. So kissing someone with an open cold sore is about a medium risk activity in terms of transmitting an STI. And then last, our highest risk activity in this lineup is oral sex on a penis or a vulva without a barrier. So like we said earlier, any STI that a person can get in their genitals or their anus, they can also get in their mouth or their throat. So if someone is performing oral sex, they should be using a barrier method, or they should be getting tested beforehand with their partner and making sure both people are negative. All right, so moving on to our next question. If you were to put these activities correctly in order from lowest risk to highest risk of transmitting an STI, obviously our lowest risk activity is going to be air high-fiving, right? Person can't get an STI from air high-fiving. Next up, we have using a public bathroom. So this is a common myth. We might hear someone make a joke and say something like, oh, I can't go into that porta potty, I'm going to get chlamydia. But we know that it's really, really unlikely that a person is going to get an STI from a toilet seat, right? So STIs like to be in like warm places on human bodies. They'll die pretty quickly on cold surfaces like bathrooms. And then also, you know, unless a person is coming in contact with those four fluids that we talked about, or skin-to-skin contact, unless they're coming in contact with those, a person really doesn't have a risk, right? So if a person is trying to think through like, hey, is this a high risk activity? Is this a lower risk activity? They can just think, okay, am I going to come in contact with any of those four fluids or skin-to-skin contact with infected genitals? And that can kind of be a good test for a person to do if they're trying to figure that out. Next up, we have sharing a sleeping bag or a towel. So this is kind of like a low to medium risk activity. So if a person has a parasitic STI, so let's say they have pubic lice or something like that, and they share a towel with someone else, hypothetically, that STI could be transmitted via that sleeping bag or that towel. But again, that person would have to have an STI in order to spread it. So we'll kind of put that in our medium spot. And then our highest risk activity that we have here is sex while on the birth control pill. So we know that the birth control pill does a great job at preventing pregnancy, but it does absolutely nothing for STIs. So if a person is using the birth control pill or any other kind of hormonal birth control in order to prevent pregnancy, they also need to be thinking about an STI prevention method. Could be using condoms, could be using a dental dam, but there's lots of different options A person could also get tested with their partner before becoming sexually active. Okay, so in our next question, again, ordering from lowest risk to highest risk of transmitting an STI, we would put sending a sext at that low risk area. Now we're talking specifically about risk for transmitting an STI, right? A person sending a sext, if it's a picture of themselves, in a lot of states, there are a lot of legal implications for that if they're a minor. But if we're talking about just STI risk, no risk of getting an STI via phone, right? Now, next up, we have hand to another person's genitals. So that would be if a person took their hand, put it on another person's genitals, and then they didn't bring it back to their own body. In that case, we have contact with one person's genitals, but it's not on another genital, so we're not getting that skin-to-skin contact. Even if the hand gets covered in some of those fluids, as long as it's not coming back to a person's body, it's a pretty low-risk activity. Then we have genital-to-genital contact. So that's moving one step up. So if a person has infected genitals and they have genital-to-genital contact, again, that STI can spread to that other person. And then last but not least, unprotected sex with multiple partners is going to be our highest risk activity in this category. So if a person wanted to protect themselves, they, again, could use a barrier method, or they could get tested with all of those partners beforehand. Okay, so for our last category, again, ordering from lowest risk to highest risk, we have holding hands as our lowest risk activity. Now, obviously, this is a pretty low risk activity, right? Person's not going to get an STI from holding hands. Now, someone might say, wait, but that's skin-to-skin contact, isn't it? And when we're talking about skin-to-skin contact, we're talking about genital contact, right? So we're not like talking about like high five, you know, or holding hands. We're talking about someone who has infected genitals having contact with other genitals. So that's the skin-to-skin that we're talking about. All right, next up, then we have oral sex with a barrier method. So this is a relatively low-risk activity. Because a person has that barrier method, they have a physical barrier in between a mouth and genitals. So that prevents the STI from being transmitted. Now, if someone is using a barrier method and it covers part of the genitals, but not all of the genitals, then those activities get a little bit higher risk. But if the mouth to genital contact is only happening through a barrier, then it's a pretty low risk activity. Then moving up, we have untreated mother to child. So this would be a mother that has an STI transmitting it to their child. In 2020, we have pretty good medical advances. So if someone has an STI, they're usually talking to their doctor about it, coming up with treatment plans so that this doesn't happen. But if it does go untreated, it is possible. And that is what moves it up into our higher risk activities. And then our highest risk activity for this category is sharing needles. Obviously, we probably all know people shouldn't be sharing needles, but anytime a needle is shared, has that possibility of transmitting an STI because of blood. There's blood on the needle, even if the person can't see it, right? So that's a pretty high risk activity. All right, so I hope you were able to order these activities, feel good about how you ordered them, maybe learn a little bit something. Now we're going to jump back into our regular webinar.